Are you in the search for buying raw land and you want to live completely off-grid? Well, my husband and I already live off-grid in New England, but we are looking to relocate to West Virginia. And like many of you, I've researched videos online and I found some great videos that talk about tips for buying land, but they don't actually show you the land itself. So not only am I going to talk about some things that you should look out for if you're buying raw land off grid, but I'm going to show you a couple of the properties that my husband and I recently looked at in West Virginia. This is from our own experience and we have our own criteria, but hopefully you guys can learn by looking at some of the land just to think of some questions to ask yourself while you're visiting. A big thing that we noticed right away was the difference between New England and West Virginia. It's realtors. Now in New England, if you're looking at either a house or even land, I am accustomed to having a realtor go with you to look at that land or house. They want to make a sale. In West Virginia, very different. Realtors don't typically go with you, especially when you're looking at land. But in our case, the realtor did not go with us, but they did give us specific directions to how to get to the land. And there's pros and cons, I guess. It's kind of find your own adventure. One of the properties, the road, they said, yeah, there's an access road. Well, you're going to see the video footage of that shortly. And one thing that I've learned, whether you're in New England or West Virginia, if land or a house is listed horse pasture, that's usually key term for it's a wetland. I've looked at other property and they're like, great, horse pasture. And the same thing at a property in West Virginia. It was all wetland and marsh, and that is not suitable, at least for us, for building a homestead. Before I go into some of the footage of us looking at land, let's go over a couple of things when you're searching for property off-grid. You have to ask yourself, how much land do I actually need to start a homestead? Are you planning to build a house? Do you have livestock already or planning to get livestock? Do you want to have a garden? Are you going to make your homestead into an income stream? Whether some people will sell soaps or crafts, have a large enough garden, have chickens. Those are all things you need to factor into how many acres you want to purchase when buying land for your homestead. For us, we're looking at about 50 to 100 acres, but we'll go down to 30 acres. We currently have 54 acres on our current homestead, so we wanted to have about the equivalent of what we have here in West Virginia. So for us, we picked West Virginia because I do have friends in the area, but mainly it's lower property taxes, lower cost of living. Yes, I know the economy isn't as great, and I am factoring that into our decision to move down there. I used to work in the veterinary field. I actually just recently became licensed in West Virginia. I got all that done up front, so it at least gives me an option. If I want to go back into veterinary medicine, it gives me an option to do so. So let's talk about financing for land. It is not always easy, and my husband and I are in the process of exploring different options. You can get a land loan. A land loan is typically a very high interest loan, anywhere from, I think they said 8 to 20%, and it's a shorter term loan, anywhere from 5 up to 20 years if you're lucky, and you need to have anywhere from 20% to 60% up front as a down payment. The reason behind that is raw undeveloped land is a higher risk to banks and credit unions, so it's a higher risk for them. So if you were able to get a land loan and you want to then get a construction loan, that is basically an interest-only loan. It's meant to be a very short-term loan, very high interest, but you're just paying interest payments so you have enough capital to build your homestead. And then after your homestead is built, you can convert that construction loan from a very high interest loan into a mortgage, and that'll give you a lower interest rate. With us, that's where we felt we went wrong, because that is how we built the current homestead we live in now, using a construction loan, converting it to a mortgage. Ideally for us, we want to try and be as debt-free going into this as possible. We may need to have some temporary housing, build a tiny house, an RV, just as we're building a new homestead, because for us, our goal is to do this debt-free as possible. We don't want to get another mortgage, but I wanted to mention a construction loan to a mortgage because that can be a possibility for people that are looking to move off grid. Getting a land loan is not easy. It usually requires a high down payment, a really good credit score, and your debt to income ratio needs to be just about perfect in order for any bank to give you a land loan. And it's not easy. There are other options, and you can look into owner finance. There's a couple websites like billyland.com. There is one in Tennessee, Landstruck. Basically, it's a low down payment, and if you are able to finance through the owner of the property, that is another way that you can finance land. And that might be an option that we're going to start looking into, if it's even a possibility. You never know until you ask the question, because you don't know how long that person's owned that land or what kind of financial situation they're in. They may be willing to do that. And they may be, you know, if they understand that you want to build a homestead and, you know, you can give a pretty hearty down payment, that could be another option. So just because it's listed for sale, just ask the question, hey, is the owner willing to self-finance? The worst they can do is say no. So even if it's not there on the listing, it's something worth asking. And the other option, cash. If you are able to pay cash for your land and own it outright, that is the best scenario possible. But for us, I don't have enough cash in hand right now to buy 50 acres of land. So we are looking at other options. But recently there actually was a property that we were looking at, and it went above asking, and it was a cash buyer. So we didn't have a way to compete with that. But another thing that we also learned is, in West Virginia, just because there's a contract does not mean that is going to go through. A lot of times the deals fall through. So even if there's an active contract, you could still look at the land or the property and just contact the realtor and say, hey, if this deal falls through, please contact me because I'm still interested in it. So just because there's an active contract doesn't mean it won't fall through. And the land that you're looking at, if you're looking to live off grid, you want unrestricted raw land. And look into zoning laws. You definitely want to look at, it's called a GIS map, so that's Geo Information System. You want to have an idea where if there's any flooding on the property, it'll usually if a property is surveyed, they'll have information on there pertaining to flooding, or if it is in a flood zone. That's important if you plan to get any type of insurance on the land down the road, because if you put a house on a property that has a flood area, it's going to make that insurance at a premium. And my advice is, if you're looking, yes, for us, if we had to drive 14 hours to another state to look at the land, but walk the land. It is so important to do that. What you want to look into is who owns the land adjacent to the land that you're looking at. What are the neighbors like? And that is another important piece, because you want to know, do you want to have close by neighbors? Do you want to not see your neighbors at all? It is good to have nice neighbors, and generally in West Virginia the folks are very friendly and we get along with most people. I have an area in West Virginia we're specifically looking at just because, like I said, we have friends in the area and we want to live close to them. But it is a consideration. You know, if you have a bad neighbor, it's going to make your living experience that much more difficult. So when you're looking at land, also maybe take a visit and just say hi, say, hey, knock on the door and just ask them, hey, we're looking at this land, what do you think of the area, etc. Just strike up a conversation. You would be surprised how much you would learn just by doing that one thing. And in West Virginia, there is a thing called mineral rights. Some properties that we've seen listed is the original owner of the property retains the mineral rights. And what that means is, say you own a property and, you know, they tell them, you know, another company, hey, you can start digging on there. I own the mineral rights. And yes, that is something you need to consider when buying land, especially West Virginia. I would rather hold the mineral rights myself because I don't want to get into a situation where somebody else owns rights to my property. They can come and dig. Yes, they would have to put it back, you know, to how it was or as close to how it was. But for me, I don't want that disturbance. I just want to own my own land and not run into that. I don't know if that's something very specific for West Virginia, but that is something to consider. So be sure you read the fine print on the listing. And if it doesn't say anything about mineral rights, be sure to ask it. And with that said, I'm going to show you guys footage that I took while we were looking at the properties. I'm not going to say where the properties are located, but they are in West Virginia, and I'll show you a couple of things of why we thought there is potential, or these were the reasons for a hard no. And if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button. I've had a few new followers and I just want to thank you guys for following me along. I hope you guys find this useful because my husband and I are embarking on this journey. I've never moved to another state before, let alone buy land and build a whole nother homestead. We do live off grid currently, so we can take our skill set and just apply it in another state. But for me, I've never bought raw land before. My husband has, so he's got some experience, and our friend has. He lives in the area. And, you know, I hope you guys take something away from this. If you have questions, even if you aren't looking in West Virginia, hopefully you'll find this information helpful. So when you're looking at raw land, you kind of know more what to look for or what not to look for. With that said, let's get into the footage that I took of the properties, and I'll put some commentary on it so you guys can see what was good and what was bad. The first property we went to look at was way out in the middle of nowhere, which we appreciated, but this is almost like a class 3 road, basically an ATV road. Luckily, my car had all-wheel drive, and we did bottom out in one section. But one thought we had was, if we were to build our house out on this property, how would we get a cement truck out here? How would a lumber truck get out here? And this isn't even the access, this is an access road, but this is the main road, which we would not own. So if we were having trouble getting out there with our own vehicle, it's going to make it difficult to bring other heavy equipment vehicles to bring materials for a homestead.
Well, because it goes down the bottom, it said that well follows the boundary down. That's
we got to the top of the property and we saw this giant power line going through it, that was instantly when we knew this is not going to be the property for us. Although it did have some magnificent views of the farm next door, living that close to the main power line was just a no-go for us. And we had a short walk over to another section of the property, and we also discovered that there was some oil spillage. They did disclose there are gas lines on the property, but if you already have livestock such as sheep, goats, chickens, cows, things like that, you have to be cautious of the water that is currently on the property. And with this situation, I already have goats and chickens. This was not something that we wanted to invest in. So this, I stress to people why it's important to walk the property, walk the boundaries of the property, see what's nearby, to see if this would be suitable for your specific needs. Now, to somebody else, this could meet their needs, but for us, this just was a no-go for us. Between the giant power lines and the oil that was, or gas that was already spilled, this was not going to work for us. Here is our second property. Now this is a shared easement, so that is somebody else's property, and it feels like you are driving right up on their property because you are. So this property has a shared easement, and there's a gate at the end of this road, and then you have to walk about a quarter mile up past that gate. And what they didn't disclose in the listing was after you walk past the gate, there's an abandoned house. As we were walking on this property, it was about a quarter mile until you got to where the property was. What they didn't list in the listing was there is an abandoned property that you walk by. And that also brings up the question, this is a shared easement. So I'm wondering who owns that abandoned property. Would they have access to our land? Where does the access, where is it defined? And there was a culvert on this property too, where I was really concerned, like if a cement truck were to go over it or a logging truck were to go over it, it could potentially collapse in. That's not part of the property, is it? So somebody else owns this, though, right?
I don't know. It's abandoned by the law.
Huh. Interesting. This property is marked even more money than the last one and less acres. And they advertise rolling fields, you can get electricity. Well, yeah. But right over there, it's another roadway and you can actually hear cars going by. There's a house up there. So, and there was an abandoned house that we saw on the way in. And we don't know who owns that. Husband's up higher just taking a look. That is kind of the frustrating part, is not having a realtor that goes with you, because yes, we're out of state, so we don't always know where the property boundaries are. So definitely this has more questions to it. I mean, yeah, this would be great for my goats. There is some wet land down at the bottom, which is of concern. Wet land is not something I'm very keen on. And I used to have, when I went to buy a house last time they're like, oh, beautiful horse pasture. It's all wetland. So the importance of walking the property. And I think they were advertising this like horse pasture, which usually means wetland. And anything wet, if you have livestock, it's not good for their feet. It's a little bit of a hike up here. So I'll go to the top and look at the view. So this is almost 100,000. And yeah, it's more flat, but there's a lot of wetlands here. And then there's an abandoned house just right over there. And I have no idea who owns that. What's in there?
It's all wet.
So it's all 100,000 for wetland. This property seems to be a bust. 32 acres, $100,000, and they advertise good for horses, but that just means wetlands. Anything?
What?
Is there anything?
I can't see it if there is. We can walk the other end of the property.
I mean, 32 acres is how far? I have no idea.
30, well, think about our land, right? That's 50 acres, right? So 30 is probably not much more than everything you see around you here. 35. Might be something over, but I don't see it. No.
Oh, squishy.
Yeah, yeah, it's all wet. Get up out of here.
I don't think you can.
Yeah.
This was the final house. It advertised it had 50 acres of land. Yes, there's a house on it. So we wanted to look at it more for the land, but unfortunately the land was straight uphill. There was a septic on there and it is already tied to the grid. So we wanted to see, hey, is there potential on the land itself where we could build a homestead? And unfortunately, that was a no. So this was our final property we took a look at. We only really had one day to look at property in West Virginia. We'll have to make another trip out. Just because there's a house on it, if it has land with it, it is something to look at. This was a really cute house, but there were structural concerns with the house itself. So unfortunately, this was a no-go for us.